Oops, my hand slipped. Dad smirked, smashing my $15,000 render drive after I denied their $250,000 demand. Mom laughed. I stayed quiet. By 8 in the morning, their entire financial world burned. Family is supposed to be your safe harbor. It is a nice sentiment, isn't it? Something you read on a greeting card or see in a holiday commercial. But for some of us, family is not a harbor at all. It is a toll booth. And my parents, Gregory and Cynthia, were the most relentless toll collectors you could ever meet. I am 32 years old, and I run my own digital animation studio. I built it from absolute scratch, working 80-hour weeks until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. My specialty might sound a bit niche, but it is deeply personal to me. I create psychology-themed animations. I use a highly stylized, fluid stickman aesthetic to break down complex human emotions, trauma, and psychological thrillers. It is not just simple doodles. It involves intense, heavy three-dimensional rendering, manipulating lighting and shadows to make these faceless figures convey raw, human pain. It took years to perfect, but it caught the eye of some major corporate clients and educational platforms. By my late 20s, I was making very good money. But my success was never really just mine. Not in the eyes of my parents. 14 years ago, when I was 18, they sold a small, empty plot of land they inherited to help pay for my art school tuition. It was a generous thing to do, or so I thought at the time. I thanked them, I cried, I promised to make them proud. What I did not realize was that selling that land was not a gift. It was an investment with an infinite, predatory interest rate. They bought the rights to my future, and they never, ever let me forget it. Every time I landed a new client, my mother, Cynthia, would sigh dramatically and mention how hard it was to part with that land. Every time I bought a new piece of equipment for my studio, my father, Gregory, would joke loudly about his return on investment. Gregory was a man obsessed with the illusion of wealth. He wore custom-tailored suits he could barely afford and leased luxury sedans that ate up his entire monthly income, just to look like a big shot at the country club. Cynthia enabled him entirely, playing the role of the devoted, sweet housewife while quietly pulling the emotional strings behind the scenes. To keep the peace, and honestly, just to get them to leave me alone so I could work, I set up something I called the peace tax. It was a joint bank account. I deposited exactly $40,000 of my own money into it. I told them it was an emergency fund for the family. In reality, it was a bribe. It was my way of saying, here is a massive cushion. Now please stop calling me in the middle of my workdays asking for loans to cover your absurd car payments. It kept them quiet, relatively speaking, for a few years. They dipped into it occasionally for vacations they called business trips, but I looked the other way. I just wanted to be left alone to draw my animations in peace. I thought the $40,000 was enough to buy my freedom. I was severely mistaken. It was a Friday night, the evening of my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. They were hosting a massive, overly catered party at their home. The house itself was a perfect metaphor for their lives. It was massive, heavily mortgaged, and filled with expensive rental furniture to impress people they did not even like. I arrived late, exhausted from a grueling week. I was right in the middle of the biggest project of my career, a massive, 90-minute psychological animation feature for a major streaming network. My custom-built workstation, a heavy-duty render drive worth over $15,000, was sitting back at my apartment, slowly churning through millions of polygons and complex lighting rigs. I hated being away from it. In my line of work, hardware failure is your worst nightmare, and I was checking my phone every 10 minutes for remote server updates. The party was suffocating. The air smelled of overpriced champagne and cheap cologne. My Aunt Donna was there, holding court by the fireplace, loudly praising Gregory for his incredible business acumen. My cousin Carter, a guy who had never held a job for more than 6 months, was nodding along, drinking my father's expensive scotch. I tried to blend into the wallpaper. I gave my parents their gift, a pair of engraved watches, smiled for a few photos, and looked for an exit strategy. I was just heading toward the hallway to grab my coat when I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was Gregory. His face was flushed, his smile a little too wide, a little too tight. "Fiona, sweetheart," he said, his voice booming for the benefit of the guests nearby. "Come into the study for a minute. Your mother and I have something exciting to share with you." I looked over and saw Cynthia standing by the hallway door, her hands clasped in front of her, wearing a smile that did not reach her eyes. She practically herded me into Gregory's dark, mahogany-paneled home office. As soon as I stepped inside, the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me. The sound of the party vanished, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. Gregory walked over to his massive desk and did not offer me a seat. He picked up a glossy, poorly bound folder and slid it across the polished wood toward me. "I am starting a new tech venture," he announced, straightening his tie. "A revolutionary platform for digital media integration. It is going to be massive, Fiona. Ground floor opportunity." I did not touch the folder. I knew exactly what this was. "Dad, I am not an investor. I am an animator." "You are a successful business owner," Cynthia chimed in from the corner of the room, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "And family supports family, Fiona. We sacrificed everything to get you where you are. Here we go. The art school debt. Like clockwork." "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. Gregory leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the desk. "I need an initial capital injection to secure the patents and get the beta off the ground. $250,000. Transferred from your business account to my new holding company by Monday." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. $250,000. $250,000. He said it so casually, like he was asking me to pick up the tab for a diner breakfast. I looked at him, searching his face for a punchline. There was none. He was dead serious. He was expecting me to liquidate my business savings, the money I needed to pay my studio assistants, my software licenses, and my rent, to fund a completely fictional tech startup. "No," I said. It was a single, quiet syllable, but it dropped into the room like a lead weight. Gregory's polite, fatherly smile melted off his face instantly. The skin around his eyes tightened, and something cold and deeply entitled crawled into his expression. "Excuse me." I said, "No, Dad. I do not have $250,000 just sitting around to throw at a startup I know nothing about. And even if I did, I would not give it to you. That is my company's operating budget." Cynthia stepped out of the shadows, dropping her sweet facade completely. Her voice turned sharp, cutting through the air. "Fiona, do not be selfish. Your father has spent months putting this together. We sold our land for you. We gave up our financial security so you could sit at a computer and draw your little stick figures all day. You owe us this." I felt a hot spike of anger in my chest, but I forced my breathing to stay slow and steady. "I am deeply grateful for the tuition help, Mom. I have told you that 1,000 times. But I have also given you $40,000 in that joint account, and I have never asked for a dime of it back. I am not funding this. The answer is no. This conversation is over." I turned around, grabbed the brass handle of the door, and walked out of the study. Behind me, I could hear Gregory breathing heavily, like a bull getting ready to charge. I did not look back. I just wanted to get out of that house, go back to my apartment, and sink into the safety of my work. I walked straight to the guest bedroom, where I had left my overnight bag and a small, heavy Pelican case. Inside that case was my secondary render drive. I had brought it with me to run some localized data backups while I was stuck at the party. It was a heavy, industrial-grade piece of equipment, packed with solid-state drives holding the only physical, uncompressed backup of my streaming network project. It was worth $15,000 in hardware alone, but the data inside was worth my entire reputation. I zipped up my overnight bag and reached for the handle of the Pelican case. "You think you can just walk away from me?" Gregory was standing in the doorway of the guest bedroom. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of red. The party was still buzzing downstairs, completely oblivious to the poison leaking out of the master suite. "I am going home, Dad," I said, keeping my voice low. "Do not make a scene." Gregory stepped fully into the room, blocking the doorway. Cynthia appeared right behind him, holding a half-empty glass of red wine. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. I felt my heart rate spike, but I kept my hands steady. I picked up the heavy pelican case by its thick plastic handle. I needed to push past them and get down the stairs. "Let me help you with that, sweetheart," Gregory said. His voice was suddenly, terrifyingly calm. It was a mocking, theatrical kind of calm. Before I could react, he lunged forward. He did not grab my arm. He grabbed the handle of the pelican case. He was a big man, and he yanked it out of my grip with a violent jerk that nearly pulled my shoulder out of its socket. "Dad, let go of that." "It is fragile," I warned, stepping toward him. He held the heavy case up by his chest. He looked me dead in the eyes. The mask was completely gone now. There was no father looking back at me, only a petty, vindictive tyrant who had just been told no for the first time in his life. He held my gaze for 3 agonizing seconds. Then he opened his hand. He did not just drop it. He thrust his arm downward, throwing the $15,000 piece of machinery directly onto the solid marble floor of the bedroom. The sound was sickening. It was a loud, sharp crack of industrial plastic splitting open, followed by the horrifying crunch of sensitive internal components shattering upon impact. The case bounced once, popped open, and spilled broken circuit boards and dented metal drives across the pristine white marble. I stopped breathing. The air was completely sucked out of my lungs. I stared at the wreckage of my life's work. Hundreds of hours of complex stickman animations, the psychology project that was supposed to secure my future, lying in pieces on the floor. Gregory dusted his hands together, brushing off invisible dirt. He looked down at the broken drives, then back up at me. His mouth curled into a cruel, triumphant smirk. "Oops," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. My hand slipped. I stood paralyzed. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a roaring sound that drowned out the faint music coming from downstairs. Cynthia took a slow sip of her red wine. She looked at the destroyed equipment, then at my frozen face, and let out a soft, condescending chuckle. "Honestly, Fiona," she sighed, waving her hand dismissively. "Do not be so dramatic. It was just an accident. You can just draw those little guys again, can't you? Now, come downstairs and cut the cake with us." They turned their backs on me and walked out into the hallway, leaving me alone in the room with the shattered remains of my livelihood. They thought they had won. They thought they had put me back in my place, reminding me that they held the power to destroy whatever I built if I did not comply with their demands. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not run out into the hallway and throw a fit. Instead, my brain executed a hard reset. I experienced a massive wave of psychological dissociation. The roaring in my ears faded into absolute, crystal-clear silence. My vision narrowed until the only things in focus were the jagged pieces of metal and plastic on the floor. I dropped to my knees. The cold marble seeped through my jeans. I systematically began picking up the pieces. I gathered the cracked solid-state drives, the broken fans, and the split casing, placing them carefully back into the broken Pelican box. My hands were moving mechanically, detached from my body. I realized, with a terrifying clarity, that the people downstairs were not my parents. They were parasites. And they had just made a fatal miscalculation. They broke my equipment to teach me a lesson, but all they did was sever the final thread of guilt that kept me tied to them. As I carried the broken case out into the hallway, Aunt Donna and Cousin Carter were walking out of the bathroom. They saw me holding the wrecked box, my face completely drained of color. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Fiona," Aunt Donna tooted, rolling her eyes. "Are you throwing a tantrum on your parents' anniversary? Your father told us you were being difficult about a little loan. Stop causing a scene." Carter snickered. "Yeah, grow up, Fiona. It is just a computer." I did not blink. I did not look at them. I just kept walking. I walked down the grand staircase, past the living room where Gregory was laughing and clinking glasses with his neighbors, past Cynthia, who was cutting a massive vanilla cake. I walked straight out the front door, into the cool night air, and got into my car. I placed the broken case in the passenger seat. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I started the engine and drove away from that house in absolute silence. No radio, no crying. Just the hum of the engine and the cold, sharp formulation of a plan. I pulled into my apartment complex just past 2 in the morning. The city was asleep, but my mind was operating at 1,000 miles an hour. I carried the broken drive inside and set it on the kitchen island. I did not try to plug it in or salvage it tonight. I needed specialized IT recovery for that, and right now, I had much more pressing matters to attend to. I went in my home office, booted up my secondary laptop, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to execute the first phase of the severance. I logged into the banking portal for the joint account, the peace tax. The balance stared back at me, $40,212. Money I had bled for. Money they thought they could use as a safety net while they smashed my life to pieces. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I initiated a wire transfer. I moved every single cent, down to the last penny, out of that joint account and directly into my private, heavily secured business account. I watched the progress bar load. When the screen flashed green with the word success, the joint balance dropped to 0.00. I did not stop there. I opened a new tab and logged into the premium cloud storage service that I paid for. For years, Gregory had used my terabytes of server space to store all his files, his legal documents, his fake business plans, everything. It was convenient for him, and it was free. I navigated to the user management console. I found Gregory's profile and Cynthia's profile. With 2 clicks, I permanently revoked their access. Then I went into the server backend and initiated a hard wipe of their specific partition folders. Years of his digital hoarding, gone in an instant. Locked out. Erased. I changed the passwords to my email, my banking, my social media, and my studio servers. I activated 2-factor authentication on every single application I owned. I built a digital fortress in the span of 2 hours. By the time I finished, the sky outside my window was beginning to turn a pale, bruised purple. It was almost dawn. I poured myself a glass of cold water and drank it slowly, staring at the empty bank screen. They thought breaking my hard drive was the end of the conversation. They had no idea it was just the beginning of the war. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know which city you live in. Every comment helps this video reach a wider audience. Thank you so much for your continued support. The weekend passed in a blur of caffeine and cold anxiety. By Monday morning, at exactly 8:30, my personal phone finally flickered back to life after being turned off for 2 days. I had barely unlocked the screen when a flood of notifications nearly froze the device. There were 22 missed calls, all from Gregory and Cynthia, and a string of voicemails that escalated from confused annoyance to outright, unhinged rage. I hit play on the most recent voicemail. Gregory's voice blasted through the small speaker, vibrating with a fury I had rarely heard. He was screaming about the joint account. He demanded to know where his $40,000 went. He called me a thief, an ungrateful child, and threatened to have me arrested for embezzlement if I did not wire the money back to him by noon. He did not mention the $15,000 piece of equipment he had smashed. He did not mention my destroyed project. He only cared that his safety net, his free ride, had suddenly vanished into thin air. I did not reply. I deleted the voicemail, blocked his number, blocked my mother's number, and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat of my car. Let them panic. Let them realize that the bank account was legally in my name as the primary account holder, and I had every right to close it. Right now, my entire focus was on the shattered Pelican case sitting in the trunk of my car. I drove across the city to a high-end data recovery center, a specialized IT lab that dealt with corporate espionage and catastrophic hardware failures. The place looked like a clean room in a hospital. I walked in, set the broken casing on the steel counter, and explained exactly what had happened. I told the technician the drive had been violently slammed onto a marble floor. The lead tech, a guy with thick glasses and a permanent frown, carefully opened the cracked plastic. He inspected the bent circuit boards and the shattered cooling fans. He told me it was a miracle the main solid-state drives were not completely snapped in half, but the internal reader heads were likely severely damaged. He quoted me a massive rush fee, easily in the thousands, just to attempt a localized extraction. I handed over my business credit card without a single second of hesitation. I spent the next 48 hours living in a state of suspended animation. I paced my apartment, drinking terrible instant coffee, staring at the blank walls. Finally, the lab called. They had managed to salvage roughly 60% of the raw data. It was not a total loss, but it meant I had to manually reconstruct the other 40% of the complex lighting rigs and three-dimensional models. I called my client at the streaming network, explained I had suffered a localized server failure, and begged for a 2-week extension. They agreed, but my reputation took a hit. I began working 18-hour days, barely sleeping, barely eating, just staring at my monitors until my vision blurred. I channeled every ounce of my anger into the animation, making the stickman figures move with a sharp, frantic energy that perfectly mirrored my own state of mind. I thought the worst was over. I thought the physical destruction was the peak of Gregory's cruelty. I had absolutely no idea how deep his betrayal actually ran. It was Tuesday of the second week. I was sitting at my desk, rubbing my burning eyes, when my business line rang. I did not recognize the number, but the caller ID showed it was local to Phoenix. I picked it up, expecting a client or a vendor. Instead, it was Chelsea. Chelsea was a highly respected, well-connected producer I used to work with at a major advertising agency a few years back. She was a shark in the industry, someone who knew everyone and attended every high-level networking event in the city. She did not bother with pleasantries. Her voice was sharp and laced with a heavy dose of concern. She asked me if I was sitting down. I told her I was. Chelsea explained that she had just attended a private, high-stakes investment mixer downtown. It was an exclusive event for angel investors and retired corporate executives looking to fund new tech startups. She told me she was walking past a presentation booth when she heard a voice she recognized from one of my old studio launch parties. It was Gregory. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I asked her what he was doing there. Chelsea took a deep breath. She told me Gregory was up on a small stage, pitching his revolutionary digital media platform to a room full of wealthy, older investors. And the cornerstone of his entire pitch, the main selling point that was getting these men to open their checkbooks, was me. Gregory was publicly claiming that I was his chief creative officer. He was telling everyone that my successful, independent animation studio was actually a subsidiary of his brand new holding company. He told them I had personally injected $250,000 of my own capital into the venture to get it off the ground, proving that the business model was rock solid. He was using my industry reputation, my hard-earned credibility, as bait to solicit hundreds of thousands of dollars from unsuspecting retirees. I felt physically sick. The room started to spin. I asked Chelsea if she was absolutely sure. She told me there was no mistake. She had even grabbed one of the glossy brochures he was handing out. My name was printed right on the front page, listed alongside a fake corporate title I had never agreed to. She warned me that Gregory was dangerously close to securing a massive round of funding from a guy named Bradley, a very prominent, wealthy retired investor who could ruin my career if he thought I was part of a scam that went sideways. I thanked Chelsea, my voice shaking so hard I could barely form the words. I hung up the phone and stared blankly at my computer screens. The shattered hard drive was just a temper tantrum. This was calculated, premeditated identity theft. He was not just trying to steal my money anymore. He was trying to hijack my entire identity to build his house of cards. The sadness completely evaporated. The betrayal was so massive, so incomprehensibly selfish, that it burned away any lingering familial guilt I might have had left. I went into full detective mode. I was not a victim crying in the dark anymore. I was a professional digital artist, and I knew exactly how to navigate the internet better than a 60-year-old man pretending to be a tech guru. I opened a secure browser and started digging. I searched the exact name of the holding company Chelsea had mentioned. Within 10 minutes, I found it. Gregory had actually hired someone to build a fully functional, slickly designed corporate website. The homepage was plastered with buzzwords about digital synergy and media integration. But that was not what made my blood run cold. It was the portfolio section. I clicked on the tab labeled Our Creative Assets. There, embedded in high definition, were 4 of my most successful animation projects. He had taken my copyrighted videos, the psychological thrillers I had poured my soul into, stripped my studio's watermark off them, and uploaded them to his fake website as proof of his company's capabilities. He was literally stealing my art to legitimize his fraud. My hands flew across the keyboard. I took dozens of high-resolution screenshots. I captured every single web page, every mention of my name, every stolen video link. I opened up a network utility tool and ran a complete domain lookup to find out exactly when the website was registered and who was paying for the hosting. It traced right back to Gregory's email address and the credit card he used to lease his luxury cars. I created a master folder on my encrypted desktop and named it the Fraud Dossier. I downloaded the source code of his website to prove the videos were hosted on his servers. I saved the audio file of Chelsea's voicemail recounting the pitch at the investment mixer. I compiled everything into a meticulous, airtight digital timeline. Every screenshot I took felt like I was loading a weapon. He really thought I was just a quiet girl who drew stick figures in a dark room. He thought, because I had paid the peace tax for years, I would just roll over and let him use my name to commit a federal crime. I sat back in my chair, looking at the mountain of digital evidence I had gathered in less than 3 hours. It was undeniable. It was a clear-cut case of corporate fraud and copyright infringement. But I knew that if I just confronted him right now, he would delete the website, deny everything, and gaslight the family into thinking I was crazy. I needed to let him dig the hole a little deeper. I needed him to admit it in his own words. By the end of the second week, the silence from my end was clearly making the family nervous. Gregory could not reach me, and his bank account was still empty. So, he sent in his flying monkey. I got a text message from my cousin Carter. It was overly casual, asking if I wanted to grab a coffee at a local cafe to catch up and make peace. Carter had always been Gregory's loyal lapdog, the guy who echoed whatever my father said in exchange for free drinks and occasional handouts. I knew exactly why he was reaching out, but I agreed to meet him anyway. I needed to see what their strategy was. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee, sat in a corner booth, and waited. Carter walked in, looking nervous. He ordered a fancy latte, slid into the booth across from me, and immediately set his phone face down on the table, right on the edge between us. He pushed it slightly toward me. It was a subtle move, but to someone who works with digital media all day, it was screamingly obvious. The microphone array at the bottom of his phone was pointed directly at my mouth. He was recording the conversation. I did not let my expression change. I took a sip of my coffee and let him speak first. Carter launched into a heavily rehearsed speech. He told me Gregory was under a lot of stress with his new business. He said the laptop incident was just an unfortunate accident, a misunderstanding, and that I was tearing the family apart over a piece of plastic. He used words like forgiveness, loyalty, and moving on. He was trying to get me to say something angry, something unhinged, so he could take the recording back to Gregory and prove I was the unstable one. I let him finish his little monologue. Then I leaned in slightly, speaking clearly and directly toward the bottom edge of his phone. Carter, I said, my voice calm, professional, and completely devoid of emotion. Let me be very clear so there is no confusion. I have absolutely no business ties with Gregory. I have not invested a single dime into his holding company. I am not his chief creative officer. Any claims he is making to the contrary are entirely his own fabrication. I wish him the best of luck, but my studio and my finances are completely separate from his ventures. Carter blinked, completely thrown off script. He stammered, trying to steer the conversation back to the broken equipment and the family drama, but I stood up. I am paying for my own coffee, I said, dropping a $5 bill on the table. You can tell Gregory exactly what I said. I walked out of the cafe, leaving him sitting there looking like a fool. I had just given Gregory a recorded statement of my complete non-involvement. I knew it would make him desperate. And desperate people make very stupid mistakes. Week 3 began with a coordinated, desperate digital assault. Gregory had clearly listened to Carter's recording, realized I was not going to quietly fund his scam, and decided to deploy the rest of the family to pressure me into submission. My phone started buzzing with a barrage of text messages in the large family group chat. It was a digital firing squad. Aunt Donna sent a massive paragraph about how my behavior was disgraceful. She called me a delusional, selfish brat who cared more about a piece of plastic than the parents who gave me life. Cynthia followed up with long, emotional, manipulative messages. She typed out how she had been crying for days, how her heart was broken by my cruelty, and how I was ruining my father's one chance at real success. They were trying to bury me in guilt. They wanted me to crack, to respond with anger, to say something they could twist. I did not argue. I did not send a single word in reply. Instead, I opened the chat on my laptop and took high-resolution screenshots of every single message. I captured Aunt Donna's insults. I captured Cynthia's manipulative guilt trips. I filed them all into the fraud dossier. While they were busy typing out their outrage, I was busy analyzing the situation. Gregory was sending them after me because he was running out of time. Chelsea had told me the investor, Bradley, was demanding to see the financial commitments before transferring any funds. Gregory had been banking heavily on the $40,000 from the joint account to pay for the initial legal fees and the fake website hosting, and he was counting on my $250,000 to show Bradley he had serious capital. Without my money, Gregory's fake company was a hollow shell. He could not pay his lease, he could not pay the vendors he had hired to look legitimate, and he definitely could not close the deal with Bradley. He was suffocating financially, and the family group chat was just the sound of him thrashing around in the water. I just needed to hand him the final anchor. I had the website source code. I had the stolen portfolio. But to make this an absolute, airtight legal execution, I needed Gregory to admit, in writing, that he was intentionally using my name to deceive investors. I needed to set a trap he could not resist. I drafted a text message to him. I made sure to use a tone that sounded hesitant, confused, and slightly submissive, exactly the way I used to speak to him when I was a teenager asking for permission. I typed, "Dad, I am really stressed." I got an email forwarded to my studio address from an investor named Bradley. He is asking to confirm our partnership and wanting to schedule a call with me about the creative direction. I do not know what to tell him. What should I do? It was a complete bluff. Bradley had never emailed me. But Gregory did not know that. I hit send and watched the little delivery checkmark appear. My heart was pounding against my ribs. If he called me, the trap would fail. If he ignored it, the trap would fail. I needed him to reply via text. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I stared at the screen, holding my breath. Finally, the 3 little typing bubbles appeared. He was writing a response. The message came through. I read it, and a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. Gregory, blinded by his own arrogance and his desperate need to close the deal, had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. He replied, "Do not panic, Fiona. I have everything under control. You need to reply to Bradley immediately. Tell him you are fully committed as my chief creative officer and that your studio's animation assets are the exclusive property of my holding company. Do not mention our argument. Just confirm your title and the $250,000 capital injection we discussed. Do not mess this up for me, Fiona. This is my legacy." I read the message 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. He had just explicitly instructed me, in writing, to lie to an investor about a fictional corporate title, a fake financial commitment, and the ownership of my copyrighted assets. It was the smoking gun. It was the final nail in his coffin. I took a screenshot of the text message, backed it up to 3 different secure servers, and printed out a hard copy. The trap had snapped shut, and he was completely caught inside it. The next morning, I walked into the sleek, glass-walled office of one of the most ruthless corporate litigation attorneys in Phoenix. I did not wear a suit. I wore my usual studio clothes, jeans, and a dark hoodie. I sat down across from the lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she ate corporate fraudsters for breakfast. I slid a massive, 50-page printed dossier across her heavy oak desk. I need you to destroy a fake company, I told her simply. She opened the binder. For the next hour, I walked her through every single piece of evidence. I showed her the WHOIS registry for the fake website. I showed her the high-definition screenshots of my copyrighted animations being used as a stolen portfolio. I played the audio of Chelsea's warning call. Finally, I handed her the printed screenshot of Gregory's text message, explicitly demanding that I commit investor fraud on his behalf. The lawyer read the text message, pushed her glasses up her nose, and let out a low whistle. "Well," she said, tapping the paper. "Your father is not very smart, is he?" "He is arrogant," I corrected her. "And he thinks I belong to him." I told her I wanted a cease and desist letter drafted immediately. It needed to be brutal, legally binding, and terrifying. It had to demand the immediate shutdown of his website, a full retraction of all statements involving my name or my studio, and it had to carry the threat of a massive federal lawsuit for fraud, identity theft, and copyright infringement if he did not comply within 24 hours. The lawyer nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she began drafting the document. She asked me who the letter should be sent to. "Send the physical certified copies to Gregory and Cynthia," I instructed. "Send a digital copy to my Aunt Donna and my cousin Carter, just so the flying monkeys know exactly what they are defending." I paused, feeling the cold weight of the final decision. "And," I added, "I want a certified copy sent directly to the lead investor, Bradley, along with the entire evidence packet showing the stolen portfolio." The lawyer looked up at me, a glimmer of professional respect in her eyes. "You realize that if I send this to his investor, his funding will evaporate instantly. It will completely burn his venture to the ground." "I know," I said, pulling out my business credit card to pay her massive retainer fee. "Burn it down." Thursday morning, the execution began. At exactly 9 in the morning, the lawyer hit send on the digital copies of the cease and desist, and the courier service delivered the physical packets to my parents' heavily mortgaged house. I sat at my desk, sipping coffee, watching the digital read receipts ping back into my secure inbox. Aunt Donna opened the email at 9:15. Carter opened his at 9:20. Bradley, the wealthy investor, opened his complete 50-page evidence packet at 9:45. For the first 3 hours, there was nothing but a deafening, terrifying silence. I imagined the absolute chaos unfolding inside Gregory's house as he read the legal threats, the realization crashing down on him that his quiet, obedient daughter had just legally cornered him. At 1 in the afternoon, the explosion finally happened. My lawyer forwarded me an email she had just received from Bradley's legal team. It was short and incredibly aggressive. Bradley stated that upon reviewing the evidence of stolen assets and fraudulent claims regarding the chief creative officer position, he was immediately withdrawing all funding offers from Gregory's holding company. He also stated he would be alerting the local Chamber of Commerce and his private investment network about the attempted scam. Bradley pulled the plug. The money was gone. The fake startup was dead before it even registered an official tax ID. 10 minutes later, I checked the URL for Gregory's fake corporate website. The slick homepage, the stolen videos, the buzzwords, they were all gone. The screen simply displayed a stark, white error message, "Domain suspended." He had panicked. Under the threat of a massive copyright lawsuit, he had frantically pulled the website down. His house of cards had officially collapsed. The $250,000 he thought he was going to steal from me was a fantasy, and the millions he thought he could con out of Bradley had vanished into thin air. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the error screen. I did not feel a sudden rush of joy or a triumphant high. I just felt an overwhelming, grounding sense of relief. The heavy chain they had wrapped around my neck for 14 years had finally snapped. The fallout was spectacular, swift, and entirely self-inflicted. By Friday evening, Gregory, completely humiliated and desperate to save face, tried to launch a public smear campaign. He posted a massive, rambling paragraph on a prominent Phoenix business networking forum. He claimed I was a mentally unstable, spiteful daughter who was actively trying to sabotage his honest tech venture because of a petty family dispute. It was a pathetic attempt at damage control. But before I could even send the link to my lawyer, the post vanished. The forum moderators, who had already been tipped off by Bradley's angry investment network, deleted the post and permanently banned Gregory's account for violating community trust guidelines. He was effectively blacklisted from the local business community in less than an hour. Then came the voicemail. It was from Cynthia. I did not answer, but the transcript popped up on my phone screen. It was a hysterical, sobbing mess. She was no longer sweet, and she was no longer condescending. She was terrified. She screamed into the phone that the dealership had just shown up with a tow truck to repossess Gregory's leased luxury sedan. Without my $40,000 piece tax to cover their ridiculous overhead, and having blown their actual mortgage money on fake marketing materials to impress Bradley, their entire financial reality was crashing down. They were completely broke. She begged me to call them back, pleading that they were family and that I could not just leave them with nothing. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the audio. I did not owe them a safety net. I heard through the grapevine later that week that Aunt Donna and Cousin Carter had completely vanished from my parents' lives. The moment the cease and desist letters arrived, proving Gregory was a fraudster facing potential federal lawsuits, the loyal flying monkeys scattered. They wanted free drinks, not legal trouble. My parents were left completely isolated in a massive house they could no longer afford. I turned off my phone, went back to my studio, and opened my animation software. The render drive was fixed, the data was restored, and I had a deadline to meet. The stickman figures on my screen moved fluidly, stepping out of the shadows and into the light. I rebuilt my project from the shattered pieces of that drive, delivered it to my client on time, and watched from a distance as my parents' financial world burned to the ground. Some relatives who used to criticize me now whisper that I was too cruel, that I should have just walked away and let family be family. So, you tell me, am I the villain for destroying his scam and protecting my name, or did they get exactly the reality check they asked for? Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our daily family dramas. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. See you in the next video.